I thought my 36th birthday was just another humiliation to endure, but when she ripped the silk off my body before 200 guests and whispered that I looked like trash, the floorboards trembled, not from shame, but from the sound of blades slicing the air outside. 3 black helicopters landed on the lawn, crushing the manicured roses. I realized then that this was not a celebration. It was an extraction. My name is Mara Whitmore, and on the day I turned 36, I walked into the lion's den wearing the wrong skin. The heavy oak doors of Roe Crest swung open, revealing the cavernous foyer of my husband's family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. I paused on the threshold, smoothing the ivory silk of my slip dress. It was a simple thing, delicate and airy, exactly what my mother-in-law had suggested when she told me the theme was casual elegance. I felt light, almost hopeful. That hope died the second I stepped onto the marble floor. It was a sea of black velvet and diamonds. Every woman in the room wore a floor-length gown, dark and heavy as a funeral shroud, while the men stood in severe tuxedos. I stood there in my pale, flimsy silk, glowing like a beacon of incompetence against the dark wood paneling. I looked less like the guest of honor and more like a confused woman who had wandered off a movie set. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that cost money. I scanned the room desperately for Elliot. I found him near the fireplace, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He looked up. Our eyes locked. In that moment, he saw exactly what was happening. He saw his wife standing alone, humiliated by a dress code lie his own mother had spun. A real husband would have crossed the room. A real husband would have taken off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. Elliot just turned his back. He leaned in closer to a senator's wife, laughing at a joke I knew he had not heard. The betrayal hit me harder than the cold air conditioning. "Oh, Mara, you made it." The voice was silk wrapped around a razor blade. Veronica Rowe descended the grand staircase, wearing a black gown that probably cost more than my father's farm in Missouri. She stopped in front of me, a glass of champagne tilting dangerously in her hand. She smiled, but her eyes were dead. "I see you went with the slip," Veronica said, her voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "It is brave, really, to be so unaware." "You said casual elegance," I managed to say, my voice tight. "You told me." "I said effortless," she corrected, stepping into my personal space. "But I suppose effort is relative when you come from—" "Where is it again?" "The cornfields." She reached out, her manicured fingers latched onto the seam of my dress at the hip. The room held its breath. "Here, let me just adjust this," she murmured. "It is bunching up. You look cheap." She pulled. She did not tug gently. She yanked with a vicious, precise force. The sound was sickening, a loud ripping noise that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The silk gave way from my hip down to my thigh, exposing the pale skin of my leg and the edge of my underwear. The gasp from the crowd was followed immediately by a ripple of laughter. I froze, my hands flying down to cover myself. To my left, my sister-in-law, Sloane, held her phone high, the red recording light blinking. "And posted," Sloane smirked. "Caption trash takes itself out." I reached for the pashmina shawl I had draped over my arm, trying to wrap it around my waist to hide the tear. Veronica snatched it from my hands before I could secure it. She threw it on the floor and stepped on it with her heel. "No," Veronica commanded. "Do not cover it. You want to dress like a streetwalker in my house. Then own it. Stand there and learn how to be a Roe." I looked at Elliot again. He was watching now. He saw his mother tear the clothes off his wife. He saw his sister broadcast it to the world. He took a sip of his drink and looked down at his shoes. That was it. The tether snapped. I was not sad anymore. I was done. I promised myself that the sun would not rise on me in this house. I would leave tomorrow, even if I had to walk to the train station with $0 in my pocket. I turned toward the heavy doors, ready to run, ready to end this nightmare. But before I could take a step, the champagne glasses on the nearby tray began to dance. A low hum started in the floorboards, vibrating up through my heels. The crystal droplets on the massive chandelier overhead began to chime, a frantic tinkling that grew louder by the second. "What on earth?" someone muttered. It was a rhythmic thumping, heavy and metallic. It was not thunder. It was the sound of rotors beating the air into submission, and it was getting closer. The French doors leading to the garden didn't just blow open. They were blasted inward by a wall of pressure. The gentle clinking of crystal and polite chatter vanished instantly, swallowed by the deafening roar of rotors. A gust of wind swept through the ballroom, overturning champagne flutes and sending napkins swirling like white surrender flags. Around me, the guests ducked and covered their heads, screaming that we were being raided. It wasn't a raid. It was an invasion. I watched through the glass as 3 matte black helicopters descended from the night sky. They didn't hover. They dropped with terrifying precision onto the manicured lawn. The landing skids crushed Veronica's prize-winning hydrangeas into the mud, obliterating the flower beds she had spent all evening bragging about. Blinding white spotlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the terrified crowd before locking onto me. I stood frozen in the beam, my hand clutching the torn fabric at my hip, feeling exposed, yet strangely seen. The side doors of the lead helicopter slid open. A team of 6 men jumped out. They weren't wearing police uniforms or military fatigues. They wore charcoal tactical suits that cost more than most cars, moving with a synchronized fluidity that spoke of private payrolls and black budgets. They marched through the open terrace doors, parting the sea of tuxedoed guests without saying a word. The man in the lead stopped directly in front of me. He was tall, with silvering hair and a face carved from granite. I recognized the cut of his suit Savile Row, not government issue. He didn't look at the screaming guests. He didn't look at my husband. He didn't even blink at the ripped dress exposing my thigh. He looked only at me. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice cutting through the dying noise of the rotors outside. "My name is Caleb Hart. We are here to extract you." Veronica surged forward, her face purple with rage. She shoved past a senator to get to us. "Who the hell do you think you are?" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Caleb. "This is private property. You are trespassing on the Rowe estate. Get out before I have you arrested." Caleb didn't even turn his head. He kept his eyes locked on mine, his expression bored, as if a fly was buzzing near his ear. "Obstructing a priority extraction is a very bad choice, Mrs. Rowe," he said calmly. "I suggest you step back." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy cream envelope sealed with purple wax and a thick titanium card. He pressed them into my trembling hands. "Orchid Vale Trust," Caleb announced, his voice crisp and professional. "Emergency control protocols were activated 22 minutes ago. We are on the clock." I looked down at the wax seal. It was stamped with an orchid intertwined with a snake. My fingers felt numb as I cracked the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting hit me like a physical blow. It was jagged, rushed, but unmistakably familiar. I hadn't seen this script in 20 years. "If you are reading this, it means they humiliated you publicly just as I predicted. Do not cry. Get in the chopper." My breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. "Ms. Whitmore," Caleb said, checking a watch that looked complicated enough to launch missiles. "We have filed an emergency petition to freeze all associated assets, but it hasn't hit the banking system yet. We need your biometric verification at the secure facility within 60 minutes. If we miss that window, the trust locks you out for 48 hours, and they will win." Freeze. Assets, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I don't understand. I don't have any assets. You do now, Caleb replied. He shifted his stance, finally acknowledging the room at large. His gaze landed on Elliot. My husband was standing by the fireplace, his face the color of old paper. And we are operating on tight margins. The petition for the freeze is already in the system. Caleb paused, a small, cold smile touching his lips. It went through quite easily, he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial volume that only Elliot and I could hear. The petition requires a spouse's signature to be valid, and it has one. I frowned, confusion warring with the adrenaline. But Elliot didn't sign anything for me. Oh, he signed something, Caleb said, his eyes drilling into my husband. Just not what he thought he was signing. I looked at Elliot. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at Caleb with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. We leave now, Caleb commanded, gesturing toward the waiting helicopter. Unless you want to stay and let them finish what they started. I turned on my heel, ignoring the wind whipping my hair across my face, and looked straight at Elliot. He was sweating. It was a cold sweat, the kind that makes a man look greasy under expensive lighting. Elliot, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. What did you sign? What did you sign before the party started? He flinched. He actually took a step back, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Mara, baby, please, Elliot stammered, his eyes darting to his mother and then back to me. You are confused. You are hysterical right now. Just look at you. You are shaking. I am not shaking because I am crazy. Elliot, I said, stepping closer. I am shaking because I am furious. See, he said, turning to the crowd, looking for validation. She is having an episode. You are too emotional. Mara, you need to calm down so we can help you. Help her, Veronica barked, stepping between us. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. She is trash. She is nothing but garbage trying to invent a story to squeeze money out of us before she gets kicked to the curb. There is no trust fund. It is a scam. Caleb stepped into the space between Veronica and me. He was a wall of charcoal wool and indifference. He leaned down, his lips close to my ear, his voice a low rumble that the others couldn't hear. Listen to me carefully, Caleb whispered. They are building a narrative right now. Look at them. Unstable wife. Public meltdown. They need you to look crazy so they can file for emergency financial conservatorship. If you stay here, they will own you by morning. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. It was a text from a number I did not recognize. Sign the papers Elliot gives you. You get $5 million, refuse, and the full video ruins your life. We have the angles you didn't see. I looked up. Sloane was standing 3 feet away, her phone camera pointed directly at my face. She zoomed in. I could see my own reflection in her sunglasses. She was smiling, waiting for the tears, waiting for the scream, waiting for the content. Go ahead, Mara, Sloane taunted, her voice pitched high for her followers. Say something crazy. I swallowed the scream that was clawing at my throat. I forced my face into a mask of stone. I would not give them a single frame of footage they could use. We are leaving, Caleb announced. He pulled a pair of heavy noise-canceling headphones from his tactical vest and placed them over my ears. The screaming of the guests, the accusations from Veronica, the whirring of the rotors, it all muffled into a dull, rhythmic thrum. It sounded like a giant heartbeat. Caleb guided me toward the helicopter. I didn't try to pull the torn silk together anymore. I let the dress hang open. I let the rip expose my thigh. I let the guests see the ruin of my outfit. It wasn't shameful anymore. It was evidence. I was a walking crime scene, and I wanted them to memorize every detail. I climbed into the cabin, the leather seat cold against my skin. Caleb jumped in beside me and slid the door shut, sealing us in. As the helicopter lifted off, the stomach-dropping sensation of flight took over. I looked down through the window. The garden was a wreck. Veronica was pacing in circles, screaming into a cell phone, gesturing wildly at the sky. But Elliot was just standing there. He hadn't moved an inch. He wasn't running toward the helicopter. He wasn't trying to stop his wife from being abducted by paramilitary lawyers. He stood perfectly still, hands in his pockets, watching me leave. It looked rehearsed. It looked like he was hitting his mark. Caleb tapped his headset and looked at me. He lifted one ear cup of my headphones so I could hear him. "The signature on the freeze order," Caleb said, his voice devoid of pity. "The one that authorized us to lock the family accounts? It is your husband's signature. The timestamp on the digital notary is 3:40 this afternoon." I felt the blood drain from my face. 3:40, I whispered. That was before I even put the dress on." "Correct," Caleb said. He signed off on freezing the assets before the party even started. He knew exactly what was going to happen tonight. I looked back down at the shrinking figure of my husband. He was just a speck of black on the green lawn now. He had sold me out before I even walked through the door. I turned to the pilot. "Fly faster," I said. The facility was buried in the heart of Midtown, a steel fortress masquerading as an office building. We didn't use a key. Caleb Hart guided me to a sleek black panel next to a reinforced door. "Look straight ahead," Caleb ordered. "Don't blink." A red laser swept across my eyes. A second later, the heavy steel bolts retracted with a sound like a gunshot, and the door hissed open. It felt less like a law office and more like a bank vault. We stepped inside a room lined with screens and glass tables. Caleb didn't waste a second. He threw a heavy file onto the table. It slid across the surface and stopped inches from my hand. "The Orchid Vale Trust isn't just money." "Mara," Caleb said, pacing the room. "It is leverage. Specifically, it grants you 51% voting control of Helion Meridian Systems." I stared at him. "Helion, the aerospace contractor." "The very same," Caleb said. "There is a merger vote scheduled for tomorrow morning, a merger that will make the Rowe family billions and gut the company's pension fund. Your husband needs that vote to pass. But under the terms of the trust, only you can cast it." He dropped another piece of paper on top of the file. It was a legal document, stamped and notarized. "But we have a problem," Caleb said, his voice grim. "This is a power of attorney." I looked at the signature line. It was my name. It was my handwriting. The loop of the M, the sharp cross of the T. It was perfect. I never signed this," I stammered, my fingers hovering over the paper. This is a forgery." "It is a masterclass forgery," Caleb corrected. "Elliot filed this with the court an hour ago. He is claiming you are mentally incapacitated. He is using your meltdown at the party as proof that you are unstable. He has requested emergency temporary guardianship for 48 hours. 48 hours, I asked, feeling the room spin. "Long enough to cast your vote for the merger," Caleb said, "and long enough to have you committed." My hand flew to my pocket. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I needed to see something real, something that made sense. The screen loaded. Checking $0.00. Savings $0.00. I tapped the credit card tab. Status locked by issuer. A notification popped up at the top of my screen. It was from our smart home security system. Master lock code changed at 3:45. He took everything, I whispered, my voice shaking. I have nothing. I can't even get into my own house." "You don't have a house anymore," a new voice said. I looked up. A woman with sharp bangs and even sharper eyes walked into the room. She was holding a tablet and wearing a hoodie that looked like it had seen better days. This was Juno Reyes, the crisis manager Caleb had mentioned. "Don't read the comments," Juno said. sliding the tablet toward me. They want you to react. They want you to look defensive. I couldn't help it. I looked. The video was already viral. It was a supercut of the party, but it was edited brilliantly. It didn't show Veronica ripping my dress. It only showed me screaming. It showed me looking wild-eyed and disheveled. It showed Veronica crying, looking like a terrified mother trying to help a sick daughter. The caption read, "Tragic breakdown at Roe Estate. Prayers for the family." They made me look insane, I choked out. I look like a monster. That is the point, Juno said, tapping the screen to turn it off. They are controlling the narrative. Veronica is the victim. Elliot is the suffering husband. And you are the crazy wife who needs to be locked away for her own safety. I felt my knees give out. I sank into the leather chair, burying my face in my hands. The walls were closing in. I had no money. I had no home. The entire world thought I was crazy. I can't. I sobbed into my palms. I can't fight them. They have everything. The room was silent for 10 seconds, just the hum of the servers and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, something cold settled in my chest. It wasn't hope. It was something harder. I wiped my face and stood up. I looked at the black screen where my humiliation had just played. "If they want to tell a story about a madwoman," I said, my voice steady, "then I will write the ending." Caleb stopped pacing. He looked at me, assessing the change in my posture. "We are running out of time," Caleb warned. Elliot filed the petition in a county where the Roe family owns the judges. The emergency hearing could happen tonight, within the hour. If we lose, if the judge grants that guardianship order. He paused, looking toward the reinforced door. "The police will be here," Caleb finished. "And they will legally be required to drag you back to your husband." Juno stopped typing and leaned back in her chair, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in her glasses. She looked frustrated. "The internal camera system at the mansion is gone," Juno said, tossing a stylus onto the desk. Veronica scrubbed the servers at midnight. She didn't just delete the files. She ran a military-grade overwrite program. It is clean. As far as the digital world is concerned, that party never happened. My heart sank. Without that footage, it was just my word against the combined power of the Roe dynasty. However, Juno added, a slow grin spreading across her face, the trust doesn't trust the Roe family security protocols. When we set up the perimeter defense for the estate 5 years ago, we installed independent peripheral sensors in the garden. They are high-resolution, infrared, and audio-enabled. And they look in. She tapped a key. A new window popped up on the main screen. The angle was from the terrace, looking through the glass French doors into the ballroom. The audio was muffled but distinct. I watched the scene play out in high definition. I saw myself standing there. I saw Veronica step forward. The camera caught the exact moment her hand clamped onto the silk of my dress. It captured the vicious, deliberate yank of her arm. The sound of the fabric ripping was sharp, like a gunshot. Then, it showed me trying to cover myself with the shawl, and Veronica snatching it away with a snarl. It wasn't an accident. It was assault. "We have them," I breathed. "We save this," Caleb said immediately, stepping in front of the screen. "We do not release this. This is our ace for the courtroom. If we drop this now, they will spin it or claim it is a deep fake before the judge sees it. We keep this sealed." "No," I said, my voice rising. "I am drowning out there, Caleb. The whole world thinks I am having a psychotic break. If we wait for a court hearing, I will already be destroyed. I want to kill their narrative. Now." "It is too risky," Caleb argued. "You show your hand. You lose your leverage." "I don't want leverage," I snapped. "I want my life back. I want them to hurt." The room was silent. Juno looked between us. "Compromise," Juno suggested. "We don't release the full sequence. We leak 10 to 12 seconds, just the rip and the shawl snatch." No audio context, just the visual violence. It is enough to turn the public opinion, but it leaves enough hidden that we can still ambush them in court with the raw file. I looked at Caleb. He clenched his jaw, then nodded once. Do it, Caleb said. But scrub the metadata so they can't trace the source. Juno got to work. Before I upload this, I need to process the physical evidence. Mara, give me the dress. I went into the adjoining bathroom and changed into a spare gray tracksuit Juno had provided. When I came back, she had the torn ivory slip spread out on a sterile metal table. She was scanning it with a handheld UV light. Standard procedure, Juno muttered, checking for biologicals, foreign substances. Wait. She stopped the light at the hem of the dress. Under the UV glow, a thin line of stitching shone a bright, unnatural orange. This isn't factory stitching, Juno said, frowning. Someone opened the hem and resewed it with a different thread. Mara, did you tailor this? No, I said. I bought it off the rack yesterday. Juno grabbed a scalpel. With surgical precision, she sliced open the silk lining where the strange thread was. She reached in with tweezers and pulled out a tiny, transparent polymer pouch. Inside was a micro SD card and a scrap of paper no bigger than a fortune cookie fortune. My hands trembled as I took the paper. Don't let them touch you. Watch card. I know this handwriting, I whispered. But that is impossible. Juno plugged the micro SD card into a quarantined drive. A video file appeared on the screen. She clicked play. The face that filled the screen was older, gaunt, and pale, but the eyes were the same. It was a man lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. E! I gasped. Uncle E! They told me he died when I was 10. The man on the screen spoke, his voice raspy and weak. Mara, if you are seeing this, then the old man is gone, and the sharks are circling. You need to know what you are voting on. The merger? It isn't about growth. It is a burial. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, before continuing. The new composite material Rowe Industries pushed through last year. It failed the stress tests. They knew it. They faked the certification data. 3 test pilots died in the Nevada crash, and they buried it as pilot error. The merger with Helion is the only way to hide the liability in a larger corporate structure before the audit hits. They are killing the company to hide a massacre. You have to stop them. The video cut to black. The room was deadly silent. That wasn't just family drama, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper. That was a confession to corporate manslaughter. I walked into the lobby of the Orchid Vale Trust building wearing a charcoal suit that felt less like clothing and more like armor. I had scrubbed the crying from my face. My hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun. No messy strands, no red eyes. I did not look like the hysterical woman trending on social media. I looked like a CEO who had just arrived to fire everyone. Elliot was waiting for me near the elevators. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, holding a sheaf of papers with a desperation that made him look small. He stepped into my path, blocking the way. Mara, thank God, Elliot breathed out, thrusting the papers toward my chest. Just sign these, please. Sign them, and Mother will stop. We can go home. My hand slipped into my pocket, my thumb silently pressing the record button on my phone. I looked him dead in the eye. Sign what? Elliot. Another admission that I am crazy. It is a retrospective consent form, he pleaded, his voice cracking. It just says you agree that you were not in your right mind yesterday. That is all. It protects the family. It protects you. Caleb stepped up beside me. He didn't even look at Elliot. He looked at the papers. The notary seal on page 3 is digital, Caleb said, his voice dry and sharp as a knife. And it is a bad Photoshop job. The timestamp is dated for yesterday morning, before the party even started. I took a step closer to my husband. "So you admit it," I asked, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "You admit you prepared the guardianship papers before I even arrived at the party." Elliot wiped sweat from his upper lip. He was panicking. He wasn't thinking. "We had to," Elliot stammered. "We had to lock you down so you wouldn't ruin the deal. You don't understand business. Mara, we couldn't risk you having a mood swing during the vote." "Got it," I whispered. Before I could say another word, the revolving doors at the entrance spun violently. Veronica marched in, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers and a man who looked like a private doctor. She was crying. It was a masterpiece of performance art. "There she is." "Sss," Veronica shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Officer, that is her. She is having a psychotic break. She attacked me." She pulled down the collar of her blouse, revealing a fresh, angry red scratch on her neck. "She tried to strangle me when I offered her help." Veronica sobbed, clinging to the officer's arm. "Please, you have to put her on a 72-hour hold before she hurts herself." The officer stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. The lobby had gone silent. People were holding up phones. This was the moment. The crazy wife narrative was about to be sealed with handcuffs. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the gentleman," the officer said to me, his tone warning. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply nodded to Juno. Juno was standing near the digital directory board. She tapped her tablet. The massive screen in the lobby flickered, overriding the building's welcome message. Suddenly, the sound of tearing fabric echoed through the marble hall like a thunderclap. The video played. It was 10 seconds long. It showed Veronica's face, twisted in a sneer, not fear. It showed her hand gripping my dress. It showed the violent, deliberate yank, and then, crystal clear, her voice boomed through the lobby speakers. "You look like trash." Then came the part where she snatched the shawl from my trembling hands. The video froze on Veronica's face, cruel, arrogant, and very much in control. The officer stopped. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at the scratch on Veronica's neck. Then he looked back at the screen. His hand dropped from his belt. "That doesn't look like self-defense, Mrs. Rowe," the officer said, his voice flat. Veronica turned pale. She looked around at the crowd, at the phones recording her. "It is fake," she screamed, her voice shrill and ugly. "It is AI. It is a deep fake. They generated it." "It is a raw file," Juno announced, stepping forward and holding up her tablet for the officer to see. "Here is the metadata, here is the hash chain, and here is the timestamp from the independent security sensors you installed. Mrs. Rowe, it is admissible in court, and it is definitely not AI." The officer took a step away from Veronica, creating a distinct physical distance between them. The doctor she had brought quietly closed his bag and backed toward the door. I looked at Veronica. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I am not silent anymore," I said. The silence that followed was heavy. I could feel the shift in the room. The whispers weren't about the crazy wife anymore. They were about the monster mother-in-law. I turned to head toward the elevators, ready to take my company back, but Caleb grabbed my elbow. His face was gray. He looked at his phone, then at me. "We have a problem," he whispered, low and urgent. "They just filed a new motion in federal court. They are asking for a permanent conservatorship and an indefinite asset freeze. The hearing is set for 72 hours from now." "We just proved they lied," I hissed. "How can they still file?" "Because they aren't using the party footage anymore," Caleb said, his eyes dark. "They submitted 300 pages of evidence, private text messages, emails, journal entries. They are using your own words from when you were grieving your father to prove you are clinically unstable." Caleb paced the small length of the secure transport van. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle while the pieces were burning. They are not just going for financial control anymore, Caleb said, scrolling through a tablet. They are going to call Sloan as a character witness. They have subpoenaed your cloud data. Every text message you sent after your father died. Every late-night confession about feeling overwhelmed. They are going to spin it. They will claim you have a history of self-harm ideation. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I remembered the nights Sloan would come over, offering wine and sympathy. I remembered her asking for my phone password because the Wi-Fi was acting up and she wanted to help me install a wellness app. It was never about bonding, I whispered, staring at my hands. She was harvesting data. She has been building a case against me for 3 years. We have a bigger problem than Sloan, Juno announced from the front seat. She spun her laptop around. A red line pulsed on a map of the city. I have been monitoring the traffic from the Helion board members, Juno said, typing furiously. Grant Larkin just sent an encrypted burst message to an unregistered number. I managed to catch a packet before it vanished. She pointed to the text on the screen. She has the card. Do whatever is necessary. Whatever is necessary, Caleb repeated, his face grim. That is not legal advice. That is a hit order. We need to get off the grid, Juno said, slamming the laptop shut. The primary safe house is compromised. I am taking us to the black site in Queens. Hold on. The van surged forward, merging onto the rain-slicked highway. The city lights smeared into long streaks of yellow and red. I looked out the rear window. A heavy black SUV was following us. It wasn't using a turn signal. It wasn't keeping a safe distance. We have a tail, I said, my voice rising. I see him, Juno said, her grip tightening on the wheel. The SUV accelerated. It didn't try to pass. It swerved violently into our lane, aiming for our rear bumper. Brace yourselves, Juno yelled. Metal shrieked against metal as the SUV clipped us. The van fishtailed on the wet asphalt. The world spun. For a second, I saw the guardrail rushing toward us, and beyond it, the dark drop to the river below. Juno cursed and ripped the steering wheel to the left, correcting the skid with terrifying precision. We missed the concrete barrier by inches. The SUV recovered and prepared to ram us again, but Juno slammed on the brakes, forcing them to overshoot, then punched the gas, taking a sharp exit ramp that the other driver missed. We plunged into the labyrinth of surface streets, leaving the assassin behind. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Caleb. He was checking a pistol I hadn't seen him draw. That wasn't a warning, I said, my breath coming in short gasps. They aren't trying to sue me. Caleb, they are trying to kill me. If you die in a tragic car accident tonight, Caleb said, his voice flat and cold, the trust reverts to the next of kin. Elliot gets everything. We sat in the heavy silence of the moving van. The game had changed. It wasn't about reputation anymore. It was about survival. We can't hide, I said. If I go underground, they will control the story. They will say I ran away because I am guilty. They will say I am unstable and dangerous. It is too dangerous to be seen, Caleb argued. It is more dangerous to be invisible, I countered. I am going to the Helion Meridian 50th anniversary gala tomorrow night. Caleb looked at me like I had lost my mind. That is walking into a firing squad, he said. It is the most public room in New York City, I replied. Senators, press, shareholders, they can't kill me on a stage in front of 500 witnesses. Caleb held my gaze for a long moment. He slowly holstered his weapon. If we do this, Caleb said, we have to do it by the book. We can't just survive the night. We need to end the war. We need Veronica to admit what she did, and we need her to do it while the world is watching. She will never admit it, I said. She is too smart. She is smart, Caleb agreed, but she is arrogant, and that is how we catch her. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was drowning in amber light and the smell of expensive lilies. It was the 50th anniversary of Helion Meridian, and the room was packed with 500 of the most powerful people in New York. The media wall was flashing, cameras were popping, and standing in the center of it all was Veronica, clutching a champagne flute, smiling like she hadn't just tried to have me committed to a psych ward. She thought I was in a holding cell. She thought she had won. I stood at the top of the marble staircase. I was not wearing a soft slip dress this time. I was wearing a midnight blue gown with structured shoulders and a high neck, tailored so sharply it looked less like clothing and more like architectural armor. I didn't look unstable. I looked like I owned the building. A hush rippled through the crowd as I descended. The air shifted. Veronica turned, her smile freezing into a rictus of shock. Before I could reach the stage, a hand grabbed my arm and pulled me into the shadow of a decorative pillar. It was Elliot. He looked like he hadn't slept in 24 hours. "Mara, wait," Elliot hissed, looking over his shoulder at his mother. "You can't go out there. She will destroy you." "Get your hand off me," I said, my voice low and steady. "Listen to me, please," he begged, his eyes wet and desperate. "I can help you. I know where she hid the other files, if you promise me immunity. And maybe $5 million from the trust. I will testify against her. I will tell them it was all her idea." I looked at him with zero emotion. He was trying to sell his own mother to save his skin. Immunity. I asked. "Yes. Just sign a waiver for me," Elliot whispered, leaning in. "We can pin it all on her." I pulled my phone from my clutch. I didn't say a word. I just pressed play on the recording from the hotel lobby. "We had to lock you down to ensure you did not ruin the deal." Elliot's voice rang out from the speaker, tinny but clear. He recoiled as if I had slapped him. "I don't need your testimony." "Elliot," I said, "I already have your confession." I walked past him, leaving him shivering in the shadows, and stepped into the light. On stage, Grant Larkin, the corrupted board member, was tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant boomed, "tonight marks a new era. I am proud to announce the merger that will define our future." He never finished the sentence. Behind him, the massive LED screen that covered the entire back wall flickered once. Then it went black. Juno had breached the system. A second later, a spreadsheet filled the screen. It was massive, high contrast, and readable from the back of the room. It showed a series of wire transfers moving millions of dollars through shell companies registered in my name, companies I had never heard of. "What is this?" Grant stammered, turning around. "Cut the feed, cut it." But the image changed. It was the video from the garden. 12 seconds of violence. The room gasped as they saw Veronica's face, twisted and ugly, ripping the silk from my body. The audio boomed through the concert-grade speakers. "You look like trash." Then, the final blow. The screen cut to the grainy footage of Uncle E in his hospital bed. The new composite material. It failed the stress tests. 3 test pilots died. And they buried it. The ballroom erupted. It wasn't polite murmuring, it was chaos. Phones were raised like a forest of glowing eyes. Grant Larkin looked for the exit, sprinting toward the stage wings, but 3 large men from our private security team stepped out, blocking his path with crossed arms. Veronica didn't run. She snapped. She saw her empire crumbling in real time, and she lost her mind. She scrambled onto the stage, shoving Grant aside, and grabbed the microphone stand. "Lies!" she screamed, her voice screeching through the feedback. "This is all lies. She is sick. She is a liar." She pointed at me, her eyes wild, her chest heaving. "You think you can humiliate me?" Veronica yelled at me across the room. "You are nothing. That video proves nothing." I stood perfectly still in the center of the dance floor. "It proves you tampered with evidence," I said, my voice projected clearly without a microphone. "Evidence," she laughed, A manic, high-pitched sound. It was a rag that dress was supposed to disappear. The room went deathly silent. Even the photographers stopped clicking. Veronica froze. She realized, a second too late, what she had just said into a live microphone. I took one step forward. "Why, Veronica?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Why was it supposed to disappear? She stammered, backing away. That isn't what I meant. You meant that you needed to destroy the SD card sewn into the lining, I said. You admitted you intended to destroy evidence. The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. A team of agents in blue windbreakers moved in. They didn't look like private security. They looked like federal authority. "Federal agents," a voice boomed. "Nobody move. We have a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices belonging to the Rowe family." I watched the color drain from Veronica's face until she looked like a ghost. She dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a deafening thud. The federal courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was 3 a.m. An emergency session convened under the weight of the mounting scandal. The judge looked exhausted. He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked down at Caleb. "Mr. Hart," the judge said, his voice raspy, "I have seen the video. I have seen the financial logs. But the defense is arguing that the digital file from the SD card could be a sophisticated fabrication. In a merger of this magnitude, the court requires absolute certainty. Unless you can produce the original physical addendum with a wet ink signature before 9 a.m, I cannot certify Ms. Whitmore's voting rights." 9 a.m. That was 6 hours away. Veronica sat at the defense table. Her makeup was flawless again, her composure rebuilt brick by icy brick. She leaned toward me, her voice a soft, venomous whisper that did not carry to the bench. "You are chasing ghosts, darling," she said, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "The old man is dead, and dead men do not hand over papers. You have nothing." My eyes drifted to the evidence table. The torn, ivory slip dress lay there inside a clear plastic evidence bag. It looked like a dead thing, a heap of ruined silk. Then, her voice from the gala echoed in my head. That dress was supposed to disappear. Why disappear? If she had found the SD card, she would have just destroyed the card. Why did she want the whole dress gone? I grabbed Juno's arm. "The hem," I whispered. "Juno, look at the hem again, not the lining, the structure itself." Juno squinted at the dress through the plastic. It is rolled," Juno murmured. "It is a tubular hem. Hollow." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was racing. "Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing clear in the quiet room. "I request permission to examine Defense Exhibit A. The dress." "Objection," Veronica's lawyer shouted. "Relevance." "The relevance is that the dress is not just clothing," Caleb interjected smoothly. "It is a container." The judge waved his hand. "Proceed. But be quick." I pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I unsealed the bag and pulled out the ruined silk. I turned the dress inside out. The tier Veronica had made exposed the side seam, but the bottom hem was still intact. It felt stiff, too stiff for silk. I took a small evidence scalpel from Juno. With a steady hand, I sliced the thread holding the bottom hem closed. I saw a glint of white. I reached in with the tweezers and pulled. A long, thin roll of material slid out. It wasn't paper. It was a translucent polymer sheet, the kind used for high-security architectural blueprints. It unrolled flat on the table, impervious to water, impervious to time. At the bottom, clear as day, was a raised seal and a signature in blue ink. "It is an addendum to the trust," Caleb announced, reading over my shoulder. "Dated 4 years ago?" He leaned in closer, his eyebrows shooting up. "Your Honor, You need to hear the trigger clause, Caleb said, his voice rising in disbelief. It states, in the event that any member of the Rowe family attempts to publicly degrade the beneficiary through the destruction of this specific garment, all indemnification clauses protecting the Rowe family interests are immediately void. Veronica shot out of her chair. She knocked her water glass over. That is a lie, she shrieked. I checked that hem, I felt it. There was nothing there. The courtroom froze. Caleb slowly turned to face her. You checked it? Caleb asked, his voice deadly calm. So you admit you were actively searching for this document with the intent to destroy it. Veronica's mouth opened and closed. She realized she had just walked into her own grave. The judge reached out. Hand me that document. He examined the seal under his loupe. He ran his thumb over the signature. The silence stretched for an agonizing minute. Then he looked up. The seal is authentic, the judge ruled, slamming his gavel. The motion for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. The asset freeze is lifted immediately. Ms. Whitmore has full voting control. He turned his gaze to the bailiff. And given the witness's outburst regarding the destruction of evidence, the judge added, glaring at Veronica, I am referring this entire file to the district attorney for a criminal fraud investigation. Veronica collapsed into her chair. For the first time in her life, she looked small. I walked out of the heavy double doors of the courthouse and into a blinding wall of camera flashes. The hallway was a sea of microphones and shouting reporters, surging against the police barricades like a tide. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted the weeping victim or the angry ex-wife. I gave them neither. I stopped on the top step, smoothed the lapel of my suit, and looked directly into the nearest lens. I did not fly away from the truth, I said, my voice steady and amplified by the silence that fell over the crowd. I flew with it! Before the reporters could shout their next question, a frantic hand grabbed my sleeve. It was Elliot. He looked wrecked. His tie was undone. His hair was a mess, and the arrogance that had defined him for our entire marriage had evaporated. Mara, please, you have to listen, Elliot begged, his eyes darting around at the cameras. It was her. It was all Mother. She made me sign those papers. I can fix this. We can fix this. Caleb stepped between us, acting as a human shield. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he thrust a thick envelope into Elliot's chest. You are served, Caleb said coldly. That is a petition for divorce, and since your signature on the financial freeze order was proven to be part of a criminal conspiracy, the prenuptial agreement is null and void based on fraud. We are taking half Elliot, and then we are suing for the rest. Elliot staggered back, clutching the papers, but I wasn't done. I pulled a file from my briefcase, the evidence of the shell companies they had opened in my name. You tried to use me as a shield for your money laundering, I said, loud enough for the federal agents standing nearby to hear. You thought if things went wrong, you could blame the unstable wife. But I am not your victim anymore, Elliot. I am the whistleblower. 2 agents moved in, flanking Elliot. Further back, near the courtroom doors, I saw Veronica. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was being detained by a marshal while a foreclosure team applied evidence tape to her phone and laptop. Grant Larkin was already being led away in handcuffs, separated from the others to prevent collusion. I walked up to Veronica. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with hate, but her mouth remained shut for the first time in her life. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't lower myself to her level. Trash doesn't decide who is valuable, I said. The sound of chopping blades cut through the morning air. The crowd turned their heads toward the plaza. A sleek helicopter, emblazoned with the Orchid Vale Trust insignia, was descending into the designated zone. It wasn't an invasion this time. It was a victory lap. The wind whipped my hair back, but I didn't flinch. It sounded like the end of the Rowe dynasty. I walked toward the chopper, carrying the sealed evidence bag containing the torn dress in one hand and the polymer scroll in the other. I didn't hide the rip in the fabric. I held it up like a war banner. It was proof of what I had survived. "The vote is registered," Caleb shouted over the roar of the engine as we climbed aboard. "The merger is blocked. The board has suspended all contracts with Rowe Industries pending a special forensic audit. They are done. Mara!" I buckled my harness. The pilot pulled the collective, and we lifted off, rising above the chaos, above the cameras, above the ruined family that had tried to bury me. Through the window. I looked down at the courthouse one last time. It looked small from up here. The woman who had walked into that building terrified was gone. As the city skyline opened up beneath us, I finally let out the breath I had been holding for 24 hours. You called me trash, but the sky is where your trash can never touch. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below sharing your location and let's chat about what you would have done in Mara's shoes. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.